The first thing Evelyn Hart noticed was the silence, not the soft kind that came with dusk on the prairie when cicadas sang and owls hooted from cottonwoods, but a heavy, suffocating silence as though the very earth was holding its breath. Her Mari's hooves struck loose stones, each clatter echoing too loudly in the canyon, making her skin prickle. The air was cooler here, scented faintly with sagebrush and something older, something she couldn't name. Evelyn pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She was 30, though the dust on her face and the strain in her eyes made her look older. Days on the trail had carved shadows beneath her cheekbones, but her spirit hadn't bent yet. It never had, not through widowhood, not through the endless miles westward, not through the gnawing hunger that clawed at her stomach tonight. Still, when her horse shied back suddenly, ears flat and nostrils flaring, a crack of fear went through her. "Easy, Rose," Evelyn whispered, stroking the animal's neck. Her voice sounded small in the vast canyon. She turned in a slow circle, the red cliffs towering high around her, their jagged faces glowing with the last light of sunset. That was when she realized where she had wandered. The canyon had a name whispered by settlers in town, never spoken, too loudly as though saying it might invite trouble. Sacred land. Apache land. Every woman at the mercantile had warned her not to stray near it. Stories said no settler who trespassed ever returned. Her pulse thudded. She hadn't meant to come here. She had been following the narrow path along the ridge, trying to find water, when the horse lost its footing and slid down into the ravine. By the time she righted herself, the trail was gone, swallowed by stone. Now she stood on ground that wasn't hers, ground that felt alive beneath her boots, charged with something she couldn't explain. The shadows thickened. A raven cried overhead, sharp and accusing, then vanished into the cliffs. Evelyn bit her lip until she tasted iron. She had two choices: turn back and risk climbing in the dark, or push forward and pray. She found a way through before night swallowed her. She chose forward. Rose's reins trembled in her grip as she tugged the chidinna horse along. Every step sounded like a trespass. Her boots scuffed ancient dust. Her breath came ragged. She wanted to hum, to fill the silence, but her throat locked. The canyon pressed in around her, the air heavy with something like judgment, then dash movement, a flicker of shadow near the rocks. Evelyn froze. Her hand flew to the small pistol tucked in her skirt pocket, though she knew full well it was useless against what the stories promised. She squinted into the gloom. At first, she thought her eyes had tricked her, but then the figure stepped forward. Tall, broad-shouldered, bare skin glinted in the dying sun, muscles hard as if carved from the stone itself. Black hair fell in loose waves over his shoulders, catching the fire of twilight. Across his chest hung strings of beads and bone. At his hip, the curve of a blade reflected faint light. Her heart slammed so hard it heard an Apache warrior. He stood no more than 20 paces away, still as the cliffs, eyes fixed on her. Dark eyes, piercing, unyielding, the kind that could strip a person down to the soul. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his weapon. He only watched. And in that watching, Evelyn felt smaller than she ever had in her life. Rose whinnied, tugging at the reins. Evelyn clutched them tight, forcing herself not to bolt. Running would mean death. She had heard enough tales to know that. Still, fear clawed at her ribs, urging her to flee, to vanish, to beg forgiveness for daring to step foot where she should not. But Evelyn Hart had never been the begging kind. Her chin lifted, even as her knees trembled. She swallowed the lump in her throat and met his gaze head on. "I don't mean harm," she whispered. The words vanished into the canyon, swallowed by the stone, but they carried a weight she hadn't meant to reveal: fear, defiance, and the raw truth that she had nowhere else to go. The warrior's head tilted slightly, as though her words puzzled him. His hand brushed the hilt of his blade. For a breathless second, Evelyn thought he would draw it, that her life would end here beneath the blood-red cliffs. But he did single quotes t dot slowly, deliberately, he lowered his hand. His silence spoke louder than words. Evelyn's knees weakened, relief, mixing with new fear. She had stepped into sacred land by mistake. But now, under the unflinching eyes of the warrior before her, she understood something far more dangerous. She was not leaving it the same woman who entered. The canyon held its breath. Evelyn's whispered words still hung in the air, fragile as spider silk. The warrior did not move. He stood like a statue carved from the very stone walls around them, broad shoulders gleaming bronze under the last ribbons of sun, his long black hair stirring faintly in the breeze. For a moment, Evelyn wondered if he were even flesh and blood, or some spirit risen from the sacred earth to judge her trespass. Her hand clenched the reins tighter. Rose shifted. Nervously, hooves pawing at the dirt, as if she too felt the weight of the man's gaze. Evelyn swallowed hard. "Do you understand me?" she asked, her voice hoarse, but her chin lifted with a defiance she barely felt. The warrior's eyes narrowed. Then, at last, he spoke. His voice was low, deep, carrying the resonance of thunder in the canyon walls. His words were not English, at least not at first, a stream of Apache syllables, sharp and rhythmic, a language that sounded both foreign and eternal. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She shook her head faintly, the knot in her throat growing tighter. I don't know what you're saying," she admitted. The warrior's eyes darkened, unreadable. Then he tried again, his voice slower this time, his accent thick but clear enough to understand. "You should not be here." The words dropped like stones into the silence. Evelyn's lips parted, and for a moment no sound came. She forced herself to speak. "I didn't mean to trespass. My horse," she slipped. "I was just trying to find water." Dakota, the name, would come later, but for now he was only a shadow to her, watched her carefully. He did not believe easily. She could see that in the tautness of his jaw, the way his hand hovered near his blade. Yet he hadn't drawn it. That in itself meant something. "I don't want trouble," Evelyn pressed. "I only want to leave." The warrior stepped closer. Evelyn's breath hitched, her fingers brushing the butt of her small pistol hidden in her pocket. But some instinct told her it would do no good if he wanted her dead. He could strike faster than she could draw. He circled her slowly, like a predator studying an unfamiliar prey. His eyes flicked to her torn dress, her dust-caked boots, the weariness etched into her face. She thought she caught a flicker of something, recognition, maybe even pity, before it vanished into the hardness of his expression. "You are alone," he said at last. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. She wouldn't speak of the riders who had been chasing her, not yet. She didn't know if she could trust him. The warrior studied her face a moment longer, then let out a sharp breath through his nose, almost like a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "A foolish woman," he muttered. Heat burned Evelyn's cheeks. "I've survived worse than this," she shot back, her voice steadier than she felt. "Don't call me foolish?" That seemed to surprise him. His head tilted slightly, the faintest crease of curiosity cutting through his sternness. For the first time, she felt his gaze not as a weapon but as a question. A sudden gust of wind howled through the canyon, scattering dust and bending the flames of the setting sun. Somewhere far above, a raven cried again, its wings cutting across the twilight sky. Evelyn shivered, though the air was still warm. The warrior finally stepped back. He lifted his chin toward the narrowing trail that wound deeper into the canyon. "Night comes," he said. "Coyotes, wolves, you cannot stay alone." Evelyn stiffened. "And you? What will you do with me?" His silence was heavier than any answer. For a heartbeat, She thought he would finally raise his blade, end her life as the stories had warned. But then he turned, gesturing for her to follow. Fire, he said simply. The single word carried command, not invitation. Evelyn hesitated. Every part of her screamed that this was madness, that she was walking deeper into the territory settlers feared, following a man whose people had every reason to hate hers. And yet, the truth pressed against her ribs. Alone, she wouldn't survive the night. She had nowhere else to go. Drawing a deep breath, Evelyn tugged Rose's reins and stepped after him, her heart pounding. The warrior walked ahead, silent, his long hair catching glimmers of dying sunlight. He didn't look back, but she knew. He was listening to every step she took, testing her resolve, weighing her worth. Evelyn glanced once over her shoulder at the canyon mouth, where the fading light bled into the desert horizon. She could still turn back. She could still risk the climb, but something deeper than fear kept her feet moving forward, something she couldn't yet name. And so, Evelyn Hart, 30 and stubborn, trespasser in sacred land, followed the Apache warrior into the shadows of night. The fire snapped and hissed, sending sparks spiraling into the black canyon sky. Shadows stretched across the walls, shifting with each crackle of flame, and Evelyn Hart sat with her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, the rough stone biting through her dress. Dakota had built the fire with quick, precise movements, striking flint against steel until light bloomed from the darkness. He hadn't spoken much since leading her deeper into the canyon. Now he sat cross-legged on the opposite side of the flames, his bronze skin glowing in the firelight, beads and bones at his chest glimmering faintly as if alive. His long black hair caught the red light and gleamed like raven's wings. Evelyn tried not to stare. She told herself she was only studying him as one might study a rattlesnake, keeping track of every movement, every shift of muscle, so she might be ready if he struck. But the truth was more complicated. There was a stillness about him, an intensity that unsettled her more than the silence of the canyon had. The fire filled the air with a sharp scent of juniper wood. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries bouncing off the canyon walls. Evelyn pulled her shawl tighter, the desert night seeping cold through her bones. At last, she broke the silence. "Why didn't you kill me?" The question startled even her, tumbling out before she could stop it. Her heart thudded. She half expected his hand to fly to the blade at his side, but Dakota only lifted his gaze to her, his dark eyes catching the fire's reflection. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice low and rough, he answered. The spirits spoke. Evelyn blinked. Spirits? He inclined his head slightly, the firelight casting deep shadows across the plains of his face. This land is not only stone and dust. It is alive with those who came before. My father, my mother, my people, they walk here still. Their voices guide me. Tonight, they told me your path crossed mine for a reason. Evelyn's throat tightened. She had heard stories of Apache beliefs, whispered half in awe, half in mockery by settlers back in town. But sitting here, in this place, with the firelight dancing and his voice weaving through the silence, she felt the weight of his words. In a way that defied dismissal, she lowered her gaze to the flames. "I don't believe in visions," she murmured. A shadow of a smile touched his lips, though it was more bitter than amused. "Belief is not needed. The spirits do not ask for it. They show what they will." For a moment, Evelyn wondered if she should press him further. But something in the gravity of his tone kept her quiet. She stared into the fire, the orange light blurring through the tears. She refused to let fall. She hadn't spoken of her husband in weeks. She hadn't wanted to. The memory was too raw, too heavy. But tonight, in this canyon filled with ghosts, she felt the ache rise in her chest until it burned. "My husband used to say things like that," she whispered, surprising herself again. that the land remembers, that it speaks. But he's gone now. He died working for men who didn't care about land, only about what they could take from it. Takota's eyes narrowed. Gold, he said, the word like a curse. Evelyn nodded, though she didn't tell him the rest, that those very men believed she carried something of her husband's, a map, a secret worth chasing her across miles of desert. She bit the words back, holding them close. The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks into the dark. Takota leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The shadows made him look carved from the stone itself, as if he had been born of this canyon, part of its spirit. You are not like other settlers, he said at last. Evelyn glanced up sharply. You don't know me. His gaze was steady. I know fear. I know lies. You walk with both, but also with fire. The weak would already be dead, yet you live. Her heart thudded harder. She wanted to argue, to deny it. But instead she found herself looking into his eyes, dark and fathomless, and feeling as though he saw more of her than she wanted revealed. The coyotes howled again, closer this time. Rose snorted and stamped her hooves nervously where she was tied nearby. Evelyn shivered, clutching her shawl. Takota's voice dropped lower, almost a murmur. Tomorrow will bring trial. The spirits have shown me this. You were not spared to walk away unchanged. Evelyn's breath caught. She had no answer for that. She only sat there, trembling before the fire, knowing she had stepped into something larger than herself, something that would not let her go. And across the flames, the Apache warrior watched her, his fate already shifting in ways neither of them yet understood. The first gunshot cracked through the canyon like thunder. Evelyn Hart jolted upright, her heart leaping into her throat. The fire's glow danced wild across her frightened face as Rose reared against her tether, neighing in terror. Echoes of the shot bounced off the stone walls, ricocheting into every shadow. For a breath, Evelyn thought the spirits Takota had spoken of had come to strike them down. But Takota was already on his feet, moving like a shadow. His hand closed around the bow resting against the rock, his muscles taut and ready, his eyes narrowing into the darkness of the canyon's mouth. They've come, he said, his voice low but steady. Who? Evelyn whispered, clutching her shawl tight. But even as the question left her lips, she knew the answer. Hoofbeats thundered in the distance, growing louder. Shouts carried on the wind, harsh voices calling orders, rough laughter echoing cruelly. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. The men. Same riders who had trailed her across the desert, relentless in their pursuit. She had prayed she had lost them, that the sacred land itself had swallowed her tracks. But she should have known better. They were like wolves, hungry and tireless, and they would not stop until they got what they wanted. Takota crouched low, his eyes sharp, his hand raised in warning. Stay. But Evelyn's breath was already quickening, her body trembling with panic. She could see them in her mind's eye, their leader with his scarred face and cold smile, the way his rifle glinted in the sun as he rode her down. She had run from them for days, but never truly escaped. They're after me. She choked, her voice shaking. Takota shot her a glance, his expression cutting, fierce. You? Yes, Evelyn admitted, tears stinging her eyes. Since my husband's death, they followed me. They believe I carry something of his. She stopped herself before saying the word map. She didn't dare. Not yet. Takota's gaze hardened. And now you bring them to my people's ground. The accusation stung, though she could not deny its truth. I never meant, she began, but another gunshot tore through the night, silencing her. Dust rose at the canyon's entrance. Lanterns bobbed in the dark, casting eerie light as the riders pressed closer. The sound of hooves was a drumbeat in Evelyn's chest, each strike promising death. Takota moved with swift precision, stringing an arrow and pulling the bow taut. His chest muscles flexed in the firelight, his silhouette fierce, otherworldly. "You will stay behind me," he commanded. Evelyn's lips parted to argue, but the steel in his tone left no room for defiance. She pressed herself against the stone wall, her body trembling, her breath shallow. She could smell the acrid smoke of the fire, hear the rasp of her own heartbeat in her ears. The first rider appeared, a broad man with a lantern raised high, his rifle glinting. Behind him came another, and another, shadows spilling into the canyon like a flood. Dakota loosed his arrow. It flew swift and silent, striking the lead rider's lantern and shattering it into sparks. The man cursed, his horse rearing, chaos erupting in the line. Shouts filled the canyon as the riders scrambled, their rifles lifting, their voices barking orders. "Find her," one shouted. "She's here somewhere." Evelyn's chest seized. Her secret had followed her even here, into the heart of sacred ground. Dakota turned his head slightly, his voice sharp. "What do they want?" Evelyn clenched her fists, her voice barely more than a whisper. "They think I carry the way to gold." For a moment, silence fell between them, heavy as stone. Dakota's eyes burned in the firelight, a storm gathering within them. Goldaward was poison, a curse that had already taken his father, his people's peace, his homeland. His jaw clenched, his hand tightening on the bow. He should send her away. She was a trespasser, a burden, a storm dragging destruction into his world. But when he looked at her, her pale face streaked with dust and firelight, her eyes wide with fear but not yet broken, something twisted in his chest. "No more running," he said, his voice a low growl. "We fight." Evelyn stared at him, her breath catching. "Fight? Against all of them?" Dakota turned back to the riders, already drawing another arrow, his broad shoulders tense, his long hair whipping in the night wind. "This is my land, my father's land. They will not take it. And you," his voice dropped, edged with something almost like prophecy, "you will stand or you will die." Evelyn's throat was dry, but she found herself nodding. Somewhere inside her, buried beneath fear and grief, a spark of stubbornness flickered to life. The riders were coming. The canyon would soon be fire and blood dot, and Evelyn Hart knew there was no turning back. The fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers that pulsed like a heartbeat in the canyon silence. Evelyn stirred awake, her body stiff from sleeping on the ground, though she doubted she had truly slept at all. Every sound had reached her ears, the cry of an owl, the whisper of wind through the rocks, the faintest shuffle of Dakota's movements as he kept his silent watch nearby. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was him. Dakota stood, with his back to her, outlined against the pale light of dawn. His long black hair flowed loose, catching the early sun like strands of polished obsidian. His broad, muscular shoulders were bare, his bronze skin etched with the scars of battles, fought long before she had ever entered this sacred place. Around his neck, the tribal jewelry of beads and bone rested like the mark of some ancient lineage. For a moment, Evelyn forgot to breathe. He seemed less like a man and more like a figure carved from the canyon itself, enduring, immovable, eternal. "Why? Didn't you leave me here?" she asked softly, surprising herself with the question. Dakota turned, his dark eyes finding hers. "The land would have swallowed you," he said simply. His voice carried the calm certainty of a man who spoke only what he knew to be true. Evelyn pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Then why keep me alive? Why bring me into your fire?" He tilted his head slightly, studying her as though searching for something hidden beneath her words. Finally, he crouched near the embers, tossing a dry stick into the coals. Sparks leapt upward, catching in his hair like fleeting stars. "You walk where you should not walk," he said at last. Sacred ground is not meant for your kind. The words stung. She lowered her gaze, staring at the dust between her boots. I didn't mean to, she whispered. I was lost. I didn't know where else to go. Dakota's jaw tightened. The spirits know no accident. You came for a reason. A chill ran down her spine at the certainty in his tone. And what reason would that be? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into a small leather pouch at his side and drew out something wrapped in cloth. With careful movements, he placed it on the ground between them and unfolded it. Inside lay a carved wooden talisman shaped like an eagle in flight. This was seen in vision, Dakota said, his voice low, almost reverent. A white woman enters the canyon, carrying fear in her heart. The eagle waits for her. Evelyn's throat tightened. She had no explanation for why her hands trembled as she reached toward the talisman, something in its worn grooves and weathered. Lines called to her as though it held a memory she had forgotten. She drew her hand back quickly. I don't understand, she said, her voice shaking. Dakota's gaze held her steady. You will. Before she could speak again, a sharp sound split the morning stillness, the crack of a twig, the sudden whinny of her horse. Dakota was on his feet in an instant, every muscle tense, his hand sliding to the knife at his side. Evelyn's heart lurched. What is it? She whispered. He raised a hand, commanding silence. His eyes swept the canyon walls. Then, faint but distinct, came the sound of voices. Men's voices. English. Evelyn's breath caught. Dakota's jaw hardened, his body rigid as stone. Riders, he muttered. They hunt. Fear surged through her. She thought of the men she had tried so desperately to escape, the debts, the lies, the relentless pursuit. Could they have followed her even here? She looked at Dakota, standing tall and unyielding in the growing light, and for the first time, she realized the truth. She was safer in the hands of this warrior than she had ever been among her own people. Stay close, he said, his voice a command yet strangely reassuring. The land tests you now. And with that, Dakota stepped toward the shadows of the canyon wall, every movement fluid, silent, deadly. Evelyn followed, her heart pounding in her chest, knowing that whatever awaited them, her fate was now bound to his. Asterisk, the voices grew louder, bouncing off the canyon walls like ghosts that refused to stay buried. Evelyn's pulse hammered in her throat as she pressed her back against the cool stone. Beside her, Dakota crouched low, his body still as carved. Granite, every line of him sharpened with readiness. His long black hair fell over his shoulders, catching glints of the rising sun, and his chest rose and fell in steady, measured breaths. Stay behind me, he whispered, his voice a calm thread of steel. Evelyn clutched her shawl tighter, though the morning chill was the least of her concerns. She knew those voices, rough, taunting, the same men who had driven her into the wilderness with their threats and debts. They had found her, and she knew what they wanted. The sound of horses echoed closer. Dust rose beyond the ridge as three riders emerged, silhouetted against the pale sky. Evelyn recognized them instantly. Jacob Harlan, his hat cocked back, sneer etched deep into his weathered face. Behind him rode two others, lean and cruel-eyed, rifles strapped across their saddles. There you are, Missy. Jacob's voice carried down the canyon like a whip crack. You thought you could outrun us, didn't ya? Thought you could hide? He spat into the dust. But debt don't disappear. You belong to us until it's paid. Evelyn's stomach twisted. She wanted to melt into the stone, to vanish into the earth. But Dakota rose slowly, stepping into view with the kind of deliberate grace that drew every eye. The riders pulled their horses to a halt, startled at the sight of him. Jacob's sneer faltered. Who the hell's this? One of the men muttered. Takode said nothing. He stood bare-chested, muscles taut beneath bronze skin, his tribal jewelry of beads and bone glinting in the morning light. His hand rested casually on the knife at his side, but his eyes dark, steady, unblinking, burned with a warning that needed no words. Jacob barked a laugh, though it rang hollow. "Looks like the lady's picked herself up a new friend." He leaned forward in the saddle, eyes narrowing. "Step aside, Redskin. This ain't your affair." Still, Dakota didn't move. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Evelyn felt the canyon tighten around them, every shadow holding its breath. "She is under my protection," Dakota said at last, his voice low, even. "Dangerous." The riders exchanged uneasy glances. Jacob spat again, forcing a grin. "Protection, huh? Ain't no law says she belongs to you. We've got claim. And unless you want trouble, you'll hand her over." Dakota's expression didn't change, but his body shifted just enough to place himself between Evelyn and the men. He seemed taller then, broader, as if the very canyon flowed through him. Evelyn's knees weakened. For so long she had been running, afraid, powerless. And now someone stood for her. "You'll not touch her," Dakota said, his words like flint striking stone. One of Jacob's men snarled, pulling his rifle from the saddle. "I'll teach this savage a lesson." Time seemed to slow. Dakota's hand flashed to his knife, the blade gleaming like fire in the sun. He crouched, ready to spring. The horses shifted nervously, sensing the storm about to break. But Evelyn moved before she even thought. She stepped out from behind him, her voice shaking but loud enough to echo through the canyon. "Stop." The men stared, startled. Even Dakota's head turned, his eyes narrowing at her. "I'm not going with you," Evelyn said, her voice trembling but firm. "I'd rather die here than live another day under your boots." Jacob's grin vanished. "You got fire now." "Do ya?" He raised his reins, but before he could urge his horse forward, Dakota stepped closer, knife gleaming. "Leave," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of ancestors who spoke through him. "The land rejects you. The spirits reject you. And I," his gaze darkened, "will end you if you take one step closer." For a long moment, no one moved. The canyon itself seemed to hold its breath. Then one of the men cursed under his breath. Another shifted in the saddle, eyes darting. Even Jacob hesitated, though his jaw worked in anger. "You'll regret this," Jacob growled at last. He jerked his reins, turning his horse. "We'll be back. And when we are, neither of you will stand." Dust rose as the three riders wheeled their horses and disappeared beyond the ridge, their voices fading into the distance. Only when the echoes were gone did Evelyn realize she was shaking. Her hands trembled, her knees buckled. Dakota turned, catching her before she collapsed against the canyon wall. "They'll return," she whispered, her voice raw. "Double quotes, yes," he said, steadying her with strong hands. His dark eyes burned with resolve. "But when they do, you will not face them alone." The day wore on, heavy with silence. The canyon held its breath, and so did Evelyn. She knew the riders would return. Men like Jacob Harlan never surrendered so easily. They were the kind who nursed grudges like a flame, waiting for the chance to strike back. Dakota, however, moved with the calm of a man who had already seen what lay ahead. He tended to the horses, sharpened his blade, and gathered wood for another fire. His long black hair gleamed in the sun, and his bare shoulders carried the weight of his ancestors as naturally as if it were the air itself. "Why aren't you afraid?" Evelyn asked at last, breaking the silence. Dakota lifted his gaze to hers, steady and unreadable. "Fear blinds the eyes. Courage clears them. The spirits show me what must be done." Evelyn drew her shawl tighter around her. "And what must be done?" Before he could answer, a sound shattered the quiet, the thunder of hooves rolling like distant storm clouds. Dust rose beyond the canyon walls. They had returned. Dakota stood, tall and unyielding, the knife at his side catching the last rays of sun. "Stay behind me," he said, though his voice was not command alone, it was promise. The riders entered, 3 dark shapes cutting across the pale stone. Jacob led them, rage etched deep into his face, a rifle now slung in his arms. He pulled his horse to a stop and spat into the dust. "You had your chance," he snarled. "Now you'll pay for standing in my way." Dakota didn't move. His long black hair swayed in the wind, his chest rising with slow, measured breaths. "This land rejects you," he said evenly. "Leave now, or you will not leave at all." Jacob barked a laugh, but his eyes betrayed unease. "You think you can fight us alone?" Dakota stepped forward, each stride deliberate, powerful, the teeth, beads and bone of his tribal necklace glinting like teeth of spirits. "I am never alone." Evelyn's heart raced. She didn't know if he meant the spirits or his people, but she believed him. Something about the way he stood, muscular, shirtless, his body carved in strength and defiance, made him seem larger than life, as if the canyon itself had risen to defend her. Jacob raised his rifle. "Then die with her." The crack of gunfire split the air. Evelyn screamed, but Dakota moved like a flash of lightning, the shot grazing stone where he had stood a heartbeat before. His knife gleamed as he surged forward, striking the rifle aside with a force that sent sparks flying. The canyon erupted in chaos. Horses reared, men shouted, dust spiraled into the air. Evelyn ducked against the rocks, her heart slamming in her chest as she watched Dakota move with the fluidity of a predator. His blade danced in the sun, his long black hair whipping behind him as he struck with precision. One rider fell hard to the ground, weapon clattering from his hands. Another swung a club, but Dakota's knife caught his wrist, twisting it until the man howled and fled into the dust. Then Jacob remained. His eyes burned with fury as he swung his rifle like a club, the butt aimed for Dakota's head. The warrior ducked low, sweeping Jacob's legs from his saddle. Horse and rider tumbled, Jacob crashing into the dirt with a grunt. Dakota stood over him, knife poised, chest heaving, eyes dark with fury. Evelyn stumbled forward, voice breaking. "Dakota, stop." The canyon fell silent again. Only Jacob's labored breathing filled the air as he stared up at the blade hovering above his throat. Evelyn's voice trembled. Don't become like him." Dakota's jaw clenched, the muscles in his arms taut with the choice before him. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to Evelyn. Her eyes, though terrified, held trust. At last, Dakota drew back. The knife lowered. He turned his back on Jacob, who scrambled to his feet and staggered away, vanishing into the dust with the last of his men. Evelyn collapsed to her knees, tears streaking her cheeks. Relief, fear, and gratitude tangled in her chest until she could barely breathe. Dakota approached, his shadow falling over her. He reached out, lifting her gently to her feet. His hand, rough and scarred, lingered at her shoulder. "You are safe," he said quietly. Her voice broke. "Not just because of you. Because you chose mercy." His dark eyes softened, just enough for her to glimpse the man behind the warrior. Mercy is strength. The canyon, once heavy with danger, now seemed to breathe again. A breeze swept through, carrying the scent of sage and dust, and Evelyn knew her life had changed forever. Dakota turned his face to the sky, where an eagle circled high above, wings wide against the fading light. A sign, a promise. And for the first time in years, Evelyn believed she was not lost. She had found her place in the sacred land, and beside the man who had chosen her fate as surely as she had chosen his.